It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind that made people slow down a little and enjoy life. The streets were filled with weekend sounds, cars rolling by, children laughing near a fountain, and the faint scent of coffee drifting out of nearby cafes. Danielle Carter stepped out of her car and stretched lightly before locking it. She had worked a long week, and today was her one day off. She wasn't wearing her usual work clothes. No dark suit, no badge clipped to her belt, no hint that she was someone trained to handle high-pressure investigations. Just jeans, a soft sweater, and sneakers. She looked like any other woman out running errands. Her plan for the day was simple. She wanted to buy a birthday gift for her niece, grab lunch, and maybe stop by the bookstore afterward. It had been months since she'd done something as normal as this. Her life as an FBI agent was full of long hours, tense operations, and endless paperwork. The quiet hum of the shopping plaza felt like another world, calm, ordinary, and peaceful. The department store she chose wasn't fancy. It was one of those large chain stores where you could find anything, from toys to perfume to kitchenware. The big glass doors opened automatically as she walked in, and cool air brushed her face. She took a slow breath, enjoying the break from the sun. Inside, the place buzzed with small talk and background music. Families shopped together, couples strolled hand in hand, and a few elderly customers pushed carts down the aisles. Danielle grabbed a small basket and walked toward the gift section. She was looking for something fun but meaningful for her niece, maybe a science kit or a puzzle. She moved slowly, reading labels, checking options, smiling to herself at some of the colorful toys. For a moment, she forgot all about work, forgot about the cases she was juggling. This was just her being an aunt, not an agent. As she turned into another aisle, she noticed something small but sharp. A store clerk watching her. It wasn't the normal kind of glance. It lingered as if she were being studied. The woman behind the counter pretended to arrange boxes, but her eyes kept flicking toward Danielle's basket. Danielle ignored it at first. She had seen that look before, cautious, judgmental. She was used to people making quick assumptions based on her skin color or the way she dressed off-duty. Years in law enforcement had taught her not to overreact. Still, a faint discomfort grew in her chest. She pushed it aside, focusing again on the toys. She picked up a boxed set of art supplies, colorful markers, paints, and drawing pads, the kind of thing her niece loved. It felt right. She smiled, placed it in her basket, and headed toward the checkout counter. As she walked, she noticed two men in uniform enter the store. Police officers. They looked like they were in their early 30s. Clean-shaven, straight posture, radios clipped to their shoulders. They spoke briefly to the same clerk who had been watching Danielle earlier. The woman nodded in her direction, her lips moving fast, whispering something. Danielle didn't think much of it at first. Cops came into stores all the time. Maybe they were responding to a call nearby. She kept walking. But as she neared the registers, the two officers began moving her way. Their steps were purposeful, their expressions firm. Her heart sank slightly. She felt that instinctive shift, the awareness that something was about to go wrong. "Ma'am, could you stop for a moment?" one of them said, holding up a hand. His tone was flat, official. Danielle turned, her basket still in her hand. "Sure," she said calmly. The taller officer spoke first. "We got a report of a possible shoplifting incident. Would you mind opening your bag?" For a second, she thought she had misheard. "Excuse me?" He repeated himself a little louder this time. "We received a complaint. Someone matching your description was seen placing items into a bag without paying." Danielle blinked, taken aback. "I haven't even checked out yet," she said, lifting the basket in her hand. "Everything's right here." The shorter officer crossed his arms. "We'll still need to see your bag, ma'am." Around them, shoppers began slowing down. Some turned to watch, others pretended not to notice but kept glancing sideways. The moment thickened with awkward silence. Danielle kept her tone even. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. I'm about to pay for my things." She gestured toward the register. The taller one took a small step closer. "If you've got nothing to hide, this won't take long." She felt a heat rise in her chest. Not fear, but disbelief. She knew exactly how this would look to anyone recording it on their phone. A woman being questioned. Two officers towering over her, people whispering. She could have flashed her badge right there. She could have ended it with one quick move. But she didn't. Something inside her wanted to see if they would treat her like anyone else, if they'd give her the same respect they'd give another shopper. "All right," she said softly. Let's keep this professional. She set her basket down and opened her small purse. Inside was her wallet, phone, car keys, and nothing else. The officers leaned slightly to look. One of them exchanged a quick glance with the other, a look that said, "This isn't over." The clerk stepped closer, her voice nervous. "I swear I saw her slip something in," she insisted. Danielle turned her eyes toward the woman, calm but sharp. "You're mistaken," the taller officer nodded to his partner. "Let's take this to the back room, ma'am." Away from the crowd. The way he said it wasn't a request, it was an order. Danielle stood still for a moment. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. A young mother whispered something to her son, pulling him aside. An older man shook his head quietly. Someone lifted a phone, recording. Inside, Danielle's instincts were firing. Every bit of FBI training reminding her to stay composed, to control the moment. She knew the law, she knew her rights, and she knew exactly what these officers were supposed to do, and what they weren't. She also knew that arguing too hard, too soon, would only make things worse. So she nodded slowly. "Fine," she said. "Let's go." They walked toward a small room near the customer service area. Danielle could hear the soft hum of security cameras above. She wondered if they were even recording properly. So many stores didn't keep footage when it mattered most. As they reached the hallway, one officer radioed something in. She caught parts of it. Female suspect. Cooperating. Possible concealment. The words stung. Suspect. Concealment. All for buying a gift for her niece. Inside the small room, the air felt heavier. There was a metal table, 2 chairs, and a wall mirror that was clearly one-way glass. Danielle placed her purse on the table and folded her arms lightly. One officer stood near the door, the other began asking questions. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Danielle Carter." "Address?" She gave it. "What brought you in today?" "To buy a gift," she answered plainly. The questions continued, tone neutral but laced with disbelief, as though they were convinced she was lying. Every so often, one of them would glance at her bag again, scanning for something that wasn't there. After a few minutes, the taller officer sighed. "All right, we'll just do a quick pat-down before we let you go." Danielle's patience thinned. "You have no reason for that," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I haven't stolen anything." "It's just procedure," he said. She took a slow breath, feeling the pulse of frustration under her calm surface. Years of service had taught her restraint, to stay logical when emotions ran high. But inside she was boiling. The irony was almost painful. She had spent her career training others on how not to let bias influence judgment, how to conduct lawful searches, how to protect people's dignity. And here she was, and on the other side of it. The officer's hand moved toward his radio again. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to—" "You'll have to what?" she said softly, cutting in. Her eyes locked on his. For the first time, the officer hesitated. Something in her tone, calm, controlled, but firm, made him pause. Danielle's thoughts drifted for a second. If only they knew who they were talking to. She looked at the clock on the wall. It had been less than 15 minutes since she walked into the store, yet it felt like an hour. Outside the room, she could still hear faint murmurs. Someone was probably telling the manager what was happening. Someone else might be filming through the small glass window in the hallway. She wanted to believe this would end soon, that they'd realize their mistake. But deep down she sensed the situation was far from over. Danielle sat quietly in the small room, her hands resting on the table. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound for a moment. The 2 officers stood near the door, whispering to each other in low voices. She couldn't hear everything, but she caught a few words. Camera, store footage, manager says she saw something. It didn't surprise her anymore. She had seen how rumors formed quickly, how one wrong assumption could grow into a story that sounded like truth. All it took was one frightened or biased person and a few words spoken with confidence. She stayed calm. On the outside, she looked collected, steady breathing, eyes forward. Inside, though, she felt something twist. It wasn't fear. It was a tired sadness, the kind that came from realizing how easily things could go wrong, even when you did nothing wrong at all. After a few minutes, the taller officer turned back toward her. "Ma'am, do you have any ID with you?" Danielle reached into her purse slowly, pulling out her wallet. She handed him her driver's license. He studied it for a moment, then looked up at her again. "All right," he said. "We're still checking with security." "Until then, please stay seated," she nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." He gave a small shrug, as if to say we'll see, and turned away again. His partner leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching her closely. Danielle's phone buzzed inside her bag. She thought about reaching for it, but she knew they'd probably stop her. She stayed still. Minutes passed. The small room felt smaller with each second. Her mind replayed the scene at the checkout. How she had been stopped, how the crowd had stared. She thought about her niece, about how she'd have to tell her she couldn't make it to the birthday party on time now. That small disappointment hurt more than she expected. The door opened suddenly and a store manager stepped in. He was a middle-aged man with glasses and a nervous smile. "Officers," he said quickly. "We checked the cameras." Danielle's attention sharpened. "There's nothing showing her taking anything," the manager said. "The footage is a little blurry, but it doesn't look like she did anything wrong." The taller officer frowned. "You sure?" "Yes," the manager said. "It could be the angle, but I don't see anything." For a brief moment, Danielle thought that was it, that they would apologize, let her go, and she could finally breathe again. But instead, the shorter officer said, "We'll need to confirm that with our own eyes. Some people know how to hide things real well." The manager looked uncomfortable. "Of course," he said softly, then slipped out of the room again. Danielle watched the door close. Her patience was wearing thin, but she didn't show it. She had been in interrogation rooms before on the other side of the table, and she knew the power of silence. She knew sometimes saying less made people reveal more. The taller officer sat down across from her now, resting his elbows on the table. "You understand this could have been a simple misunderstanding," he said, his tone lighter than before. "I understand that," Danielle replied. "But it's turning into more than that, isn't it?" He looked at her carefully as if deciding how much to say. "We just need to clear things up." Danielle leaned forward slightly. "Then let's clear them up. I bought one item. It's right there in the basket. I was on my way to pay when you stopped me." He didn't answer. For a while, no one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady and cold. Then the shorter officer moved closer, pulling on gloves. "We're going to need to check your bag again," he said. Danielle blinked. "You already did." "This time more carefully," he said, her jaw tightened. "Officer, you're overstepping," he raised an eyebrow. "You refusing a lawful search?" "Lawful?" she repeated quietly. "You've already searched my belongings. There's no probable cause for more." The taller one sighed. "Ma'am, it'll be quicker if you just cooperate." "We're not trying to cause trouble here." Danielle looked up at him for a long moment. His words sounded calm, but she could hear what wasn't being said. "We're not backing down." "Fine," she said softly, opening her purse again and placing it on the table. "Go ahead." The shorter officer began going through it piece by piece. Wallet, phone, keys, a small hand lotion, a folded grocery list. Nothing. He even checked the lining inside. Still nothing. Danielle watched him the entire time, her eyes steady. The taller one shifted awkwardly beside him, clearly aware of how wrong this looked. After a minute, the officer closed the purse. "All right," he muttered. Danielle could tell he was disappointed, not relieved but irritated that he hadn't found what he was looking for. "So," she said quietly, "are we done?" The taller officer hesitated. "Almost." He turned toward his partner and said something under his breath. Danielle caught just one word: body. Her stomach turned cold. She leaned back in her chair. "No," she said firmly. "You're not doing that." The shorter officer looked at her. "It's standard procedure when we can't find stolen property." "No, it's not," she said. "You have no evidence, no probable cause, and you're not searching me any further." There was a small silence. The air in the room felt heavy. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Look, ma'am, if you're innocent, this'll all be over soon. We'll make sure to keep it professional." Danielle stared at him for a long second. She almost wanted to laugh at how easily he used that word. Professional. She spoke slowly, each word measured. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The two men glanced at each other, confused. Danielle reached into her inner jacket pocket where she kept her credentials, not for everyone to see, but always close. She pulled out her leather badge case and placed it on the table. The gold letters gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. For a moment, no one moved. The taller officer blinked, leaned forward, and read the words silently. Then his face drained of color. The shorter one took a step back. "Wait, you're—" "Yes," Danielle said calmly. "I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you just accused me of shoplifting because someone thought I looked suspicious." Neither officer spoke. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the lights above. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness carried more power than shouting ever could. "You searched my bag. You called me a suspect. You were about to search my body. All based on nothing." The taller officer stammered. We didn't know." "That's the problem," she said. "You didn't care to know." The shorter officer looked away, clearly shaken. His hands were still gloved, but they trembled slightly. Danielle took her badge back, sliding it into her jacket pocket. "Now," she said, "I'd like to speak to your supervisor." The taller officer swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." He turned quickly and left the room. The other followed a few seconds later, closing the door behind them. For the first time since it began, Danielle exhaled deeply. The tension drained from her shoulders. She had handled dangerous suspects, high-risk arrests, and undercover missions. Yet nothing made her heart ache like this moment did. She wasn't angry in the way she thought she'd be. It wasn't rage that filled her, it was disappointment. The kind that sank deep, quiet, but heavy. She knew that by the time their supervisor arrived, the tone would change. The apologies would come, the explanations, the excuses, but the damage was already done. She looked around the small room again, the plain walls, the cheap metal table, the faint smell of cleaning spray. She had seen hundreds of rooms like this in her career, but never from this side. Her phone buzzed again in her purse. This time she pulled it out and checked the screen. It was her sister, probably wondering where she was. Danielle typed a quick message, "Running late. We'll explain later." She set the phone down and waited. When the door finally opened again, the taller officer returned. This time with a man in a dark uniform, a police lieutenant. His expression was serious, tight-lipped. "Agent Carter," he said quietly, "I'm deeply sorry about this situation. There's clearly been a misunderstanding." Danielle nodded but didn't smile. "Yes, there has." He motioned for the officers to step outside. They left the room quickly. "I assure you," the lieutenant continued, "this will be reviewed immediately. You have my word." "I'm sure it will," Danielle said. Her tone was polite, but her eyes told a different story, one of disbelief, exhaustion, and quiet resolve. He offered to escort her out of the store personally, but she declined. "I can find my own way," she said. As she walked out, people were still there, some pretending not to stare, others watching with curiosity. Danielle kept her head high, walking straight toward the exit. Outside, the afternoon sun hit her face again. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a second. The world outside was loud, bright, and alive. Yet she felt strangely detached from it, as if she were standing behind glass, watching it all happen to someone else. She unlocked her car, placed the small gift bag on the passenger seat, and sat quietly behind the wheel. For a long moment, she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, letting the weight of what had happened sink in, and though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. Danielle sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine. The street outside the shopping plaza was still busy, but the noise felt distant, almost muted. She stared ahead through the windshield, her reflection faint against the glass. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, but her mind was far from calm. She had been trained to face danger, to chase criminals, to survive intense situations, but what happened inside that store wasn't a case or a sting or part of her work. It was personal. It cut through her in a way that no operation ever could. She finally turned on the car, letting the air conditioner hum quietly. The cool air hit her face, but it did little to cool the heat in her chest. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a second. She thought about calling someone. Maybe her supervisor, maybe a friend from the bureau. But a part of her didn't want to talk yet. She didn't want to hear anyone say, "I'm sorry that happened to you." She didn't want sympathy. What she wanted was understanding and accountability. After a few minutes, she pulled out of the parking lot. She didn't drive straight home. Instead, she parked at a nearby coffee shop. She needed a place to think. She ordered a small black coffee and sat in a corner by the window. People around her were laughing, chatting, tapping on laptops. Ordinary lives going on as if nothing had happened. She envied their ease. She replayed everything in her mind again. The store clerk's suspicious look. The officer's disbelief when she told them who she was. The silence that filled the room after she revealed her badge. That silence still echoed in her mind. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from her sister. "Are you okay? You didn't come to the party." "Everyone's asking about you," Danielle typed slowly. "I'm fine. Just got delayed. I'll tell you later." She hit send, then stared out the window for a long moment. The sunlight flickered off car windows outside, and people passed by with shopping bags and smiles. She wondered how many of them had ever been judged unfairly. How many had felt that cold, sinking feeling of being accused of something they didn't do. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from her supervisor. She hesitated, then answered. "Agent Carter," came the voice on the other end, calm and professional. "I heard there was an incident?" "Yes," she said quietly. "You could call it that." He asked her to explain, so she did. Not emotionally, not angrily, just the facts. How she'd gone shopping, been watched, stopped, searched, and humiliated. How the officers ignored her ID and her calm explanations. How they finally turned pale when they saw her badge. Her supervisor listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long pause. "Are you all right?" he asked finally. "I'm fine," she said, though she didn't mean it. "But it shouldn't have happened." "No, it shouldn't," he agreed. "We'll need a formal statement. And I'll be notifying the local police chief. You did the right thing by staying calm." Danielle almost smiled at that. "I've spent years telling others to stay calm," she said softly. "Didn't think I'd have to remind myself one day." Her supervisor promised to follow up and asked if she wanted any assistance. She thanked him but declined. After the call ended, she stared at her reflection in the window again, her calm face hiding the storm beneath. For the next few days, things moved fast. The department opened an internal review. The police chief reached out personally, scheduling a meeting to discuss the incident. The store released footage showing exactly what Danielle had said, that she had done nothing wrong, but no amount of paperwork or phone calls could erase the moment itself. That sting of being seen not as who she was, but as what someone assumed she was. When the day of the meeting came, Danielle arrived early. The police station wasn't far from where it had happened. She walked in wearing her badge, her posture firm, her expression neutral. The receptionist recognized her name and directed her to a small conference room. Inside sat the police chief, an older man with tired eyes, and the two officers from that day. Both of them looked uncomfortable, dressed in plain clothes instead of uniforms. There was also an internal affairs representative and Danielle's supervisor sitting at the far end of the table. The air in the room was tense but quiet. The chief began, clearing his throat. "Agent Carter, thank you for meeting with us. I want to start by saying this department deeply regrets what happened." Danielle nodded slightly but said nothing. He continued. "We've reviewed the body cam footage and it's clear that the situation was mishandled. You were cooperative at all times, and there was no evidence of theft or any wrongdoing on your part." She listened silently, her eyes steady on the chief. "The officers," he went on, "will face disciplinary review, and we're implementing immediate training sessions focused on bias awareness and professional conduct." Danielle finally spoke, her voice calm but strong. "I appreciate that. But this isn't about me alone. This happens every day to people who don't have a badge to protect them afterward." The chief lowered his eyes for a moment. "You're right," he said quietly. "And that's something we have to change." She turned her gaze toward the two officers. One of them looked down at the table. The other met her eyes for just a second before looking away again. "I'm not here for an apology," she said. "I just want you to remember what you felt when you realized who I was, that shock, that fear. Now imagine if I hadn't been an agent. Imagine how different this would have ended." No one responded. The silence spoke enough. Her supervisor placed a folder on the table. "We'll be documenting this officially," he said, "and we'll expect a report of the department's corrective actions." The meeting lasted another 15 minutes. By the end, Danielle stood, shook hands with the chief politely, and left. She didn't wait for the officers to say anything. Outside, the late afternoon light was fading. The street was quiet, lined with golden leaves that rustled softly in the wind. She took a deep breath. It felt like the first full breath she'd taken in days. When she got home that evening, her sister called again. "I saw something online," her sister said. "Is it true?" "About what happened?" Danielle sighed. "It's true. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to make it a big thing." Her sister's voice softened. "But it is a big thing. You didn't deserve that." Danielle didn't answer right away. She looked around her living room, the framed pictures on the wall, the neat stacks of files on her desk, the little birthday card her niece had drawn for her last year. "Maybe something good will come out of it," she said finally. "Maybe it'll make people think." Her sister was quiet for a moment. "You've always been calm about things like this," she said. "I don't know how you do it." Danielle smiled faintly. "If I let every wrong moment break me, I'd have nothing left to stand on." After the call ended, she sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. She thought about her job, how she'd spent years chasing justice, collecting evidence, building cases to prove the truth. But the truth she'd lived that week didn't need a file or fingerprints. It was plain to see. The next morning, she went back to work. Her colleagues greeted her with quiet respect. Some had heard what happened, others hadn't. But everyone sensed something had changed. During a briefing later that day, her supervisor pulled her aside. "There's going to be a press statement," he said. "You're not required to attend, but if you want to say something, you can." Danielle thought about it for a moment. She didn't want attention, but she did want meaning, so she agreed. A few hours later, standing before a small group of reporters, she spoke briefly. "I want to make something clear," she said. "This isn't about one store or two officers or me. This is about what happens when judgment replaces fairness. I've seen enough of the world to know that bias can destroy trust faster than anything else. And rebuilding that trust is everyone's job." Her voice didn't shake once. She finished her statement, thanked them, and walked away. Later that evening, she sat on her couch, finally allowing herself to relax. She turned on the TV, but her mind wandered. She thought about all the people who had seen the video online, the clip of her being stopped the moment she revealed her badge. It had spread faster than she imagined, stirring conversations everywhere. Some people defended her. Some debated what really happened. But what mattered most to her was that it made people talk. She looked at her phone again. There were dozens of messages, friends, colleagues, strangers, all saying they admired how she handled herself. She smiled softly. It wasn't pride she felt. It was peace. For the first time in days, she felt lighter. She knew the story wasn't over yet, that more meetings and reports were coming. But at least now she had turned a painful moment into something meaningful. Outside, the night was quiet. Danielle stood by her window again, looking out at the lights scattered across the city. In that still moment, she whispered to herself, "If this had to happen, at least it'll matter to someone." And deep down, she hoped it truly would. The next few days felt strangely quiet for Danielle. Everything around her looked the same. Her apartment, her office, the streets she drove through every morning. But inside, something had shifted. The incident at the store had left a mark. Not one that could be seen, but one that sat deep, like a reminder she carried with her everywhere. She had moved past anger, but not past reflection. Every time she saw a police car drive by, she felt a small tug in her chest. Not fear, just awareness. At the FBI office, her co-workers greeted her like usual, but there was a softness in their voices, a quiet respect in their eyes. Some of them had seen the viral video that captured part of what happened. The clip didn't show everything, just the moment she stood in the store surrounded by officers, staying calm as she told them who she was. People online had reacted in all kinds of ways. Some praised her composure. Others used it as a reason to argue about justice and bias. Danielle didn't read the comments. She didn't need to. She had lived the moment. That was enough. Her supervisor called her into his office that afternoon. The blinds were half closed and sunlight filtered through in thin lines. He gestured for her to sit. "I spoke with the police chief again this morning," he said. "They've completed their internal review. Both officers have been officially suspended while the case goes through final review." Danielle nodded. She had expected that. The supervisor continued. "They also want to extend another apology, a public one if you're open to it. The chief said he'd like to make a joint statement about improving community trust." She leaned back slightly in her chair. A public apology? He nodded. It's up to you. No pressure. Danielle took a moment before answering. If it helps prevent this from happening again, then yes. I'll do it, but I don't want it to feel like a performance. Her supervisor smiled faintly. That's why you're the right person to do it. Later that week, the event was scheduled at City Hall. It wasn't large, just a few reporters, some community members, and local leaders. Danielle stood on one side of the room, dressed neatly in a navy suit, her badge clipped at her belt. Across from her stood the police chief and several officers, including the two who had stopped her that day. When the chief stepped up to the microphone, his voice was steady but humbled. We are here today to acknowledge a serious mistake, he began. No one is above being questioned, but no one should ever be judged before being heard. What happened to Agent Carter was unacceptable, and we are taking full responsibility. The room was quiet. Cameras clicked softly in the background. When it was her turn to speak, Danielle walked to the microphone. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need them. I appreciate the apology, she said, but I also hope we understand that apologies aren't the end. They're the beginning. What happened to me was painful, but I know it happens to others who don't have the same voice or position I do. That's why this conversation matters. Her words were calm but clear, carrying through the room with quiet strength. She didn't look at the officers directly while speaking. She wasn't there to humiliate anyone. She was there to remind everyone what respect should look like. When the event ended, a few people came up to her. A local pastor, a community leader, a teacher. They thanked her for speaking out with grace instead of anger. She appreciated their words, but she didn't see herself as brave. She saw herself as responsible. That evening after the event, she drove to a small park by the lake. It was a place she often went when she needed to clear her thoughts. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold as the sun began to set. She sat on a bench watching the ripples move across the water. She thought about her parents, how they had raised her to stay calm in the face of unfairness. Her father used to say, "Dignity is something no one can take unless you hand it to them." She had remembered that sentence inside that store, when everything in her wanted to fight back. As she watched the water, she heard footsteps behind her. It was the police chief. He had followed her after the event, asking if he could speak privately. She nodded. He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. For a while, neither spoke. They just watched the lake, the quiet air filled with the sound of distant birds. Finally, he said, "I've been doing this job for over 30 years. I've seen mistakes, but this one hit me different. When I saw that body cam footage, I realized how easily things could have gone wrong." Danielle listened quietly. He went on, "I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure it means something. I've already started rewriting parts of our training. More focus on communication, less on assumption." She turned to him. "That's a good start." He nodded slowly. "I also want to thank you. Most people would have gone public with anger. You chose patience instead. You could have ruined careers, but instead you're helping us rebuild." Danielle looked out at the water again. "It's not about ruining anyone," she said softly. "It's about reminding people to look before they judge. Every person deserves that." They sat in silence again for a few moments before he stood up to leave. "You ever need anything from this department?" "Agent Carter," he said sincerely. "You have it." She gave a small nod, grateful for his words. After he left, Danielle stayed on the bench until the sun disappeared completely. The sky turned deep blue, and the streetlights flickered on one by one. As she drove home, she turned on the radio. A local news station was covering the story from the press event. Hearing her own name felt strange, but she hoped the coverage would do more than fill airtime. She hoped it would make people think. The following week, her office received an invitation from a nearby university. They wanted her to speak at a forum about ethics and integrity in law enforcement. At first, she hesitated. She didn't see herself as a speaker or activist, but her supervisor encouraged her. "You have a voice people listen to," he said. "Use it." So she agreed. When the day came, the auditorium was full of students studying criminal justice and public administration. Some looked nervous, some curious, others simply eager to learn. Danielle stood at the podium and took a deep breath. She started by telling them she wasn't there to lecture, but to share a lesson she had learned the hard way. Law enforcement is built on trust, she said. But trust doesn't come from power. It comes from fairness. The badge you wear isn't a shield to judge others. It's a promise to treat them as human first. She told the story carefully, without bitterness. She explained how even small moments of bias could spiral into bigger problems, how assumptions could ruin good intentions, and how every officer, every person really, had to be self-aware enough to question their own judgment. The students listened closely. Some nodded, others took notes. One young woman in the front row raised her hand and asked, "How did you stay calm in that moment?" Most people would have snapped. Danielle smiled softly. "I reminded myself who I was," she said. "Not just my job, but my values. Anger makes you lose control. Calm makes people listen." When the talk ended, students lined up to thank her. One young man said, "You made me see the badge differently. It's not just about authority. It's about responsibility." That moment filled Danielle with quiet pride. Maybe, she thought, something good really had come from it all. Later that night, she sat on her balcony with a cup of tea. The city lights twinkled below and a soft breeze moved through the trees. She felt at peace for the first time in weeks. Her phone buzzed with a new message, a short note from the police chief. "Thank you again for today. The training updates have started. You made a real difference." Danielle smiled as she set the phone down. She looked up at the stars, faint but steady in the dark sky. The whole experience had been exhausting, yes, but it had also reminded her of something important, that strength doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from grace. And though the memory of that day at the store would never leave her completely, she was grateful for how it had changed her, not hardened her, but sharpened her sense of purpose. The world could judge, misunderstand, and make mistakes. But as long as people like her kept standing firm, calm, and fair, there was hope. She leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet night wrap around her, and whispered to herself, "One day at a time." The weeks after the public apology felt like a strange calm after a storm. Danielle had gone back to her usual work at the field office, reviewing reports, mentoring junior agents, and attending meetings. Yet, even in the middle of normal days, people would stop her in hallways or during lunch breaks just to say how proud they were of her. At first, she didn't know how to react. She hadn't set out to be an example of anything. She just wanted fairness. But as the days passed, she realized that her story had reached far beyond what she expected. People were talking, not just about her, but about the bigger picture. About assumptions, behavior, and how easily trust can break if people aren't careful. One morning, while she was pouring coffee in the office kitchen, one of the new agents walked up shyly and said, "Agent Carter, I just wanted to thank you. My younger sister saw your interview online and it inspired her. She said it reminded her that she can stay calm and strong even when people treat her unfairly." Danielle smiled warmly. "Tell her that being calm doesn't mean being silent," she said. "It just means you choose how to use your voice." Moments like that made her realize something important. She had turned a painful experience into a reason for others to believe in themselves. Later that week, she got a call from her supervisor. "There's a training workshop coming up at the State Police Academy," he told her. "They want someone to talk about real-world experiences with bias and respect during field operations. I think you'd be perfect for it." She hesitated for a moment. "You think they'll actually want to hear from me?" He laughed softly. "They asked for you by name." So she agreed. The day of the workshop, the academy gym was filled with young recruits in uniform. Some looked barely out of college, others already carried themselves like seasoned officers. Danielle stood at the front, dressed simply in a white shirt and black blazer. She began by telling them that everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is how you respond when you realize them. "You don't wear a badge to prove power," she said gently. "You wear it to prove trust. And every time you meet someone, that person decides if they can trust you. Not because of your title, but because of your actions." She told them the story of the day she was accused, describing it without anger. She focused on what she learned from it, how communication could change everything, how respect could calm even tense situations. She ended by saying, "The job isn't about control, it's about connection." When she finished, There was a long silence before the room broke into applause. One of the instructors, a veteran officer, approached her afterward and said quietly, "I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never heard it put that simply. We needed that reminder." As she drove home that afternoon, Danielle felt lighter. For the first time since the incident, she wasn't thinking about what went wrong. She was thinking about what could go right. Over the next month, she was invited to more events, community meetings, police conferences, even a local podcast. Each time she spoke in the same calm, honest tone, focusing on respect and empathy. People listened. They didn't just hear her words, they felt them. One evening, she received a message from one of the two officers who had detained her at the store. The message was short and humble. "Agent Carter, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I wanted to say I'm truly sorry. I've been attending the new training programs and trying to learn. I see things differently now. Thank you for how you handled that day." Danielle read the message twice. She didn't reply immediately. She just sat with it for a while, letting the words settle. Then finally she wrote back, "Thank you for reaching out. Growth starts with awareness. Keep learning. That's what matters most." It wasn't forgiveness in words, it was forgiveness in action. Her days slowly returned to routine. She worked cases again, traveled occasionally for investigations, and spent time with her family on weekends. Yet she noticed that people often treated her with new respect, not because of her badge, but because of how she had carried herself through something unfair. Her parents visited one Sunday afternoon. They sat on the porch sipping lemonade while her mother watched birds flutter near the fence. Her father looked at her and said, "You know, I watched that City Hall video again. You sounded like your grandmother when you spoke. Strong but kind." Danielle laughed softly. Grandma never raised her voice, but everyone listened when she talked. Her father nodded. "Because she spoke with truth. You've done the same." The moment filled Danielle with quiet pride. She realized that sometimes strength didn't come from fighting harder, it came from staying grounded. A few weeks later, she was invited to a national conference on public service. It wasn't just for law enforcement, it included teachers, nurses, firefighters, and social workers. The theme was humanity in service. She wasn't sure. She belonged at first. But when she walked on stage, she saw faces from all kinds of backgrounds. People who worked every day to help others, often without thanks. She shared her story again, but this time she focused on empathy. How every person deserved to be seen beyond labels. "Everyone in this room wears some kind of uniform," she said. "But under every uniform is a person with fears, hopes, and families. If we can remember that, if we can look at others and see their humanity, then we can do our jobs better." Her words drew a standing ovation. Afterward, a nurse approached her and said, "You reminded me why I chose this work. Sometimes we forget to see the person in front of us." That night, Danielle went back to her hotel feeling grateful. The incident that once embarrassed and hurt her had become something that united people. She hadn't planned it that way. It just happened because she stayed true to who she was. Months later, she was promoted to lead a small task force focused on community partnership and training. Her job wasn't just solving crimes anymore. It was helping bridge gaps between law enforcement and citizens. She worked with schools, churches, and local organizations to build trust. One afternoon, she stood in front of a classroom of high school students talking about leadership. A young girl raised her hand and asked, "Have you ever been scared while doing your job?" Danielle smiled. "Of course, fear isn't the absence of courage. It's the reason we need courage." The girl nodded thoughtfully, and Danielle saw in her eyes the same spark of belief she used to have when she was that age. When class ended, the principal thanked her for coming. "You've given them more than advice," he said. "You've given them an example." Driving home, Danielle thought about everything that had happened, from the humiliation of that day in the store to the peace she now felt. Life had come full circle. The city had changed too. The police department's new training programs were now part of the regular schedule. Officers were required to attend workshops that focused on cultural understanding and empathy. Complaints of misconduct had decreased noticeably. She knew progress wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was happening. Step by step, conversation by conversation. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened her journal. She didn't write much, just a single line. Sometimes the hardest experiences become the clearest mirrors. She looked at the sentence for a long moment and smiled. It was true. Her phone buzzed, a message from her supervisor. "You're being nominated for a community leadership award. Just a heads up." She laughed quietly and texted back, "That's kind, but I'm just doing my job." Still, deep down, she felt a warm sense of fulfillment. Not pride in fame, but pride in growth. Before going to bed, she looked at her badge resting on the dresser. It reflected a faint shimmer of light from the lamp. For her, that badge no longer represented authority. It represented responsibility, the promise to protect with empathy, to act with fairness, and to see every human being with respect. She turned off the light, feeling peaceful. The journey had been hard, but it had taught her more about humanity than years of training ever could. And as she lay down, she whispered to herself the same thing she had told the students. Stay calm, stay kind, stay strong. Because that was who she had always been, even when the world tried to test her. Months had turned into a full year since that unforgettable day in the store. Life for Danielle had slowly found its rhythm again, yet something inside her had changed permanently. It wasn't bitterness or resentment, it was awareness, a stronger sense of purpose that guided her every day. Every morning she still followed her routine. A cup of black coffee, a short jog, and a few minutes standing by the window of her apartment watching the sun rise over the city. But now, when she looked at that skyline, she didn't just see tall buildings or traffic moving below. She saw people, all kinds of people, going through their own struggles, victories and quiet moments of courage. She had learned to look deeper, to notice things she might have missed before. Her days at work were steady. Her team had grown to respect her even more, not because of her position, but because of how she handled herself through everything. They often came to her for advice, not just about cases, but about how to deal with people, how to stay calm in tense moments, how to speak with empathy. One morning, the office received news that they had been awarded a community service commendation for their partnership program, the same initiative Danielle had helped build after the incident. When her supervisor announced it during a meeting, everyone clapped. He looked at her with a smile and said, "You started something good here. You turned one bad moment into something that's changing lives." Danielle didn't know what to say. She just smiled quietly and nodded. That weekend, there was an award ceremony at the community center. It wasn't a big formal event, just a gathering of local leaders, teachers, and officers who had worked together to improve the city. Families were there too, children running around while soft music played in the background. When Danielle walked in, she saw familiar faces and the police chief, community workers, and even a few people who had once criticized law enforcement, now smiling and talking with officers. It was the kind of scene she had once only hoped to see. During the ceremony, the host invited Danielle to the stage. She wasn't expecting it, but she walked up with her usual calm confidence. As she accepted the small plaque they gave her, the host said, "This is for those who believe change doesn't come from anger, but from understanding." The audience clapped warmly. Danielle stood there for a moment, taking it in. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I never imagined something painful could lead to something so meaningful. But it reminded me that we can't control what happens to us, only how we respond. We all have choices. We can react with hate or we can choose patience, and that choice changes everything." Her words drew quiet nods from the audience. People felt them, because they came from the heart. After the event, a small group of high school students approached her. One of them said shyly, "We watched your story in class. It made us think about how we treat people. Thank you for showing what real strength looks like." That moment touched her deeply. She smiled, shook their hands, and said, "If you remember one thing, let it be this. Treat everyone like their story matters, because it does." Later that night, she sat in her car in the parking lot, watching the moonlight reflect off the hood. She took a deep breath and thought about how far things had come. It wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about building something better. The next few months were busy. Danielle was assigned to lead a new program that worked directly with communities affected by mistrust or fear of law enforcement. She traveled to several small towns, meeting people in schools, churches, and neighborhood centers. She listened more than she spoke. She heard people's stories, mothers worried about their sons, young men who felt unseen, and officers who admitted they sometimes didn't know how to bridge the gap. Danielle didn't have all the answers, but she had empathy, and that was enough to start healing. One afternoon, after finishing a long community meeting, she received an unexpected letter at her office. It was handwritten, neatly folded inside an envelope with no return address. She opened it and began reading. "Agent Carter, you don't know me, but I was one of the people in the store that day. I saw everything. At the time, I didn't know who you were, just that you handled the situation with a grace I'd never seen before. I wanted to say thank you. You changed how I see things. I used to think speaking up didn't matter, but now I know it does. You showed me that calm is stronger than rage. I hope you're doing well." She sat quietly for a while after reading it, her hand resting on the paper. It was a small thing, a few lines on a page, but it meant the world. It was proof that what she did mattered, even to people she'd never meet again. That evening, she went home and placed the letter in her journal, right next to her earlier note that said, "Sometimes the hardest experiences become the clearest mirrors." Life moved forward. Seasons changed, and Danielle continued to grow. She was invited to a televised panel about leadership and justice. It was a national program viewed by millions. She almost turned it down, not wanting fame or spotlight. But then she thought of all the people who might need to hear her message. People who had lost hope in fairness or who felt invisible in their daily lives. So she agreed. The studio lights were bright, but she spoke calmly, her voice steady. She talked about compassion and leadership, about using authority with humility, and about how listening could sometimes solve more problems than punishment ever could. When the host asked, "What kept you so composed during that unfair moment?" she answered, "I remembered that losing control doesn't make you powerful, it makes you predictable. Staying calm means you stay in charge of your story." The audience applauded softly. It wasn't loud or flashy, it was respectful, understanding applause. After the show, she received dozens of messages from viewers, officers, teachers, students, and parents, all saying how much her words meant to them. One message stood out. "You made me believe that one person really can make a difference without shouting or fighting, just by staying kind." That night, as she sat on her balcony again, the city lights glowing below her, Danielle smiled. She felt peace, not because life was perfect, but because she had found meaning in imperfection. The next morning, she went back to work like any other day. She stopped for coffee at her favorite shop where the barista greeted her by name. As she waited, a young officer in uniform walked up to her. "Agent Carter?" he asked nervously. "Yes?" He smiled shyly. "I just graduated from the academy. You came to speak there months ago. I wanted to say, your story is the reason I decided to become an officer. You made me want to do it right." For a second, Danielle was speechless. Then she smiled and said softly, "Then make sure you always remember why you started." He nodded, and she could see sincerity in his eyes. As she left the cafe, she thought about how moments come full circle, how something once filled with pain could grow into something that helped others. When she arrived at the office, her supervisor handed her a letter from headquarters. It was an offer, a promotion to oversee community relations programs across several states. It was a big step, but one that felt right. She accepted. Her last day at the local field office was filled with handshakes, laughter, and quiet goodbyes. Before she left, she stood in the doorway of her office for a moment, taking in the view, the files on her desk, the humming of computers, the faint sound of colleagues chatting. Then she smiled and whispered, "Thank you." Driving away, the city looked different, not because it had changed, but because she had. She no longer saw herself as the woman who had been wrongfully accused. She saw herself as the woman who turned that injustice into a lesson for thousands. That evening, she sat by the lake again, the same spot where she had once talked to the police chief after the apology. The water was calm and the sky was painted gold by the setting sun. She took a deep breath, feeling the wind brush against her face, and whispered, "I forgive the past," and she meant it. She had come full circle, and from pain to peace, from silence to purpose. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Danielle smiled, knowing that her story was no longer about what had been done to her. It was about what she had done with it.